Waters with your host, Bud Leavitt.
Well, you can call this a renewal of the fireside chat. My program guest is Dr. Bud Fackleman. How did a veterinarian ever end up in the state of Maine, the sporting goods business?
Well, Bud, it's kind of a long story. It reaches back 40 years or so when my father used to bring me here fishing and hunting, and learned to love the Maine woods, and never really strayed too far from the idea of someday returning and making a lifestyle out of it, despite the travels that we had throughout the world. And then returned to this country to teach first at University of Pennsylvania and then later at Tufts University. And when retirement became a possibility there, why we lived out the dream and moved to Maine and bought a sporting camp, and that's what brought us to Little Lyford.
The Facklemans are at Little Lyford. That was my following question. When your father took you here, did you go to the Little Lyford camps back in those days?
No, in fact, we spent most of our time in the greater Moosehead area and around Rockwood and Greenville, Jackman, in that sort of chain on the west side of the lake. We came to know the Lily Bay side just by camping and some of the hunting activities, but most of our time was spent on the west side of Moosehead, so I knew that area a lot better than I knew the area of Little Lyford.
Tell me about your father. Was he an outdoorsman at heart?
At heart, yes. In practice, it was difficult for him to be so. He was very much involved in the defense industry in New York and had precious little time, especially when I was growing up in the 40s, to spend taking long vacations into the woods. But you'd be surprised at just how much woods and wildlife there is in that part of New York and eastern Long Island and so forth. And we enjoyed deer hunting out there, pheasant, certainly duck hunting and goose hunting. So we spent a lot of time in the outdoors together.
What was your dad, a fisherman or a hunter or an all-purpose individual?
Mainly a fisherman.
Really?
And in fact, mainly a saltwater fisherman for that matter. Due to his own youth on Long Island, that was the orientation, and that's where we spent most of our time. However, we both got into fly fishing in a heavy-duty way when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and I've never given it up since then, neither has he for that matter.
Did he encourage you at that young age to be a participant in the outdoors?
Very much so. Without Dad's encouragement and Mom's tolerance, why, I don't think I would have developed the kind of interests that I have today. And when I first went to Cornell to study, why I was in wildlife management and fisheries biology because of my background at home and his urging, really.
What moved you to become a veterinarian?
Association with other veterinarians and veterinary students at Cornell. I had always had a lot of animals, loved animals. I had never given serious consideration to veterinary medicine as a career until I got to Cornell and explored the possibilities there. I had a very interesting and foresighted advisor in Gus Swanson, head of the conservation department at Cornell at the time, and he looked into his crystal ball and mine and wondered if I wouldn't make a better contribution in a medical field than at that time pursuing the more bureaucratic and governmental roles that I might play in wildlife conservation or fisheries. There was not at that time the big opportunity for veterinarians in wildlife management such as there is today. And I think on balance he was probably right.
What did that experience teach you?
The experience
as a veterinarian. working around animals. And
It taught me a lot about animal ownership and the responsibility that we all have to the animals that we own that is often given short shrift among people that either own animals already or are about to purchase them. It's a heavy responsibility and it extends over many years usually, and it was something that I tried to stress as a practitioner, whether among small animal owners or large animal owners, where most of my life was spent, that purchase, that initial flare of interest needs to be kept alive over a long, long period of time, or it will not result in a good relationship.
did you do much work around horses?
Almost exclusively, especially toward the latter part of my academic career, I was dealing only with horses and only with orthopedics. The horse was an animal that interested me greatly right from the beginning of my veterinary career. And at that time, in the 60s, why an awful lot of fracture cases or orthopedic injuries in general bode the death knell for a horse. And I was interested in finding out why and what might be done to help that situation.
I don't know what you have for television facilities at Little Lyford, but I have an idea, zero. But at the Breeders' Cup recently,
Yes.
when the sadness of that great, great horse having to be put down, what a moving thing that was.
Indeed, yeah. It's not to be said that there are no fractures or no injuries that do and should result in humane destruction. There still are quite a few of them out there, and a lot of us that are involved in orthopedic research are in fact involved in trying to prevent that kind of fracture from taking place. In all probability, a certain weakness of bone is in fact built up in that animal during its training period, and we need to be able to recognize that earlier and deal with it before the catastrophic fracture takes place. Not unlike the same situation in human beings, be they athletes or elderly people, where certain things may be used as a predictive index to warn of such a problem occurring, but we're not that far yet.
I could talk about horses all day long, and
Me
I
too.
know very little about them. And I've been nothing but a loser to them all my life. But one other question. I've been reading, of course, about that when it was a tragedy at the Breeders' Cup. But the fragileness, I guess is the word, of a horse's leg, a great racehorse, like that young horse was. It's unbelievable, the great weight that it carries and so forth on those small bone structure, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. However, as an engineering material, it's strong enough to take all the strain that a racehorse, for instance, or a jumper, puts upon it. It turns out that it's not so much an engineering problem as it is a biological problem, whereby, as I say, there are certain processes taking place in that bone, a remodeling type process, especially in a young horse, that is impossible to fully evaluate on a routine X-ray, for instance. And we do need to get a little bit deeper into our analyses of that bone in order to be able to prevent that kind of an injury from taking place.
Well, I'm out of my field. I got to bring you back to something. How come Little Lyford? Why did the Facklemans select Little Lyford?
Well, that blame for that we'll put on the doorstep of Yankee Magazine. And,
Oh, really?
Indeed. It was in their house for sale section and written up there. And
Was this a Mel Allen story?
Yes, in fact it was, yeah. And it
The
was
rascal, and he watches this. I knew you would be the go ahead.
he wrote about it in a very forthright and matter-of-fact way. In fact, the title of the article was "Little Lyford's Not for Everyone." And we went in and visited the owners after an abortive attempt because of flying conditions and not being able to make it in. A month later, we finally did make it in. It was March and sort of spring conditions as far as the snow was concerned. Snowshoed into the place and did some snowshoeing around the Gulf Haggis area and back to camp, and came to love it. And we did quite a bit of soul searching in terms of that radical switch in careers. Had a lot of discussions with the administration at Tufts University, who treated me very well and made it possible for us to do it, and for me to still keep a foot in both clinical and teaching arenas while I'm in the woods. But that's what attracted us to Little Lyford, and we felt that if we did wait out the usual retirement plan and coming of retirement age, that it might be too late, and we wouldn't take that kind of responsibility on. So we made the move and had a lot of good friends support us in doing so.
How does it feel to cut 26 cord of wood?
You're tired when it's over, and very, very glad that it's over. The pile that we begin with seems insurmountable, and yet as you work your way through it, you have plenty of time for thought and a bit of meditation, if you will, if you can do it over the chainsaw. But you're very, very glad when it's over. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever expect to find the number of duties attendant to running a sporting camp that you found? And
No. I must say that the thing that we were looking for more than any other basic philosophic change was the rich variety that's offered by this job. You may be baking bread one moment and be under a tractor the next, only to be followed by a repair of a generator and a leaking faucet, and so the day goes. Much, much more variety than is offered by the usual professional career. But no, I had no idea of the myriad chores that it would involve.
how has Mrs. Fackleman accepted this?
Not only accepted it, she encouraged it and has thrived on it, though many of her friends put that question in perhaps a little bit more definitive terms. Yeah.
A number of questions. We could talk a lot about Little Lyford and that entire country. It's certainly not an undiscovered part of Maine. Your feeling about the moose season? And where are we going with it? And should it be expanded or whatever? What are your thoughts on moose? You live right in the middle of the moose colony, so to speak.
Indeed we do, and they frequent our camp, and they're around the ponds all the time, and certain of them have even been given names by the guests and so forth. It is my understanding, and according to my own amateurish observations, that the moose population can stand more hunting pressure than it is getting now. Just what that number is, I'm not sure of, but significantly more than it's getting now, and still maintain the numbers of moose that we have and the health of the herd. However, I am concerned by the present situation, and therefore am more concerned with an expansion of the present situation based mainly on aesthetics. The moose is an animal that is not very difficult to spot on roadside due to its size, and due to its behavior does not have the tendency to flee as rapidly as some other species like white-tailed deer. Hence the tendency is to step out of the pickup and to kill the animal rather near to roadside, and then to gut it and to take the carcass in to be tagged, all of which is fine from the perspective of nature or any other perspective if we accept the fact that we are going to hunt moose. But I feel that our hunting fraternity, and I number myself a member of that, has enough of a black eye, egg in the face, whatever you'd like to call it, already from an aesthetic standpoint, and to intentionally call for more criticism by continuing with this kind of activity in full view of people that may not view the situation as you or I do, is only to compound the problem that exists right now and potentially lead to a total elimination of the moose hunt, for starters. So unless some kind of legislation, agreement, whatever it would take, could be reached whereby this sort of activity was not necessarily carried out right at roadside, I think it would be a mistake to expand that.
Well, Bud Fackleman, are you reading into this, thinking of something like a corridor, like 250 to 500 feet from roadside? Is this offensive to people who are non-hunters?
Indeed it is, and I think that it is the death of an animal and then its dismemberment that is probably the most distasteful thing to any non-hunter, at least any of the non-hunting people with whom we come in contact at the camp. And yes, I think such a corridor, not unlike that which we establish around dwellings for safety's sake, would be entirely appropriate. And one could weave into the fabric of such legislation a statement to the effect that in fact it does serve to increase the safety of the moose hunt. These roads are now heavily traveled, not just by hunters, but by many other people, and to have high caliber rifles going off in that degree of proximity to a major artery of travel is not in the best interest of hunter safety.
Well, I know your clientele, combination of people who enjoy wild trout, photographers, nature-seeking people, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, and that kind of endeavor. Do these people sometimes complain of coming across things like that, where a deer, to put it boldly, has been gutted out, or a moose has been gutted out?
Oh yes, I mean it's occurring now to enough of an extent that during the 1 week season, several of our guests came upon gut piles right next to the road, and if they don't come upon them, the ravens make sure that the material is spread around enough, the ravens and the coyotes that are in profusion back in there, that it would be very difficult for it to escape notice when left in that location.
I had a question that you knew I was going to ask. Where are we going with respect to clear cutting?
Well, on balance, I believe we've gone too far already, and that we appear to be continuing on that road. I know the economics of the paper industry and the logging industry in general that have led us to desire, a need to clear cut. I am saddened that we were not foresighted enough to see the kind of community, forest community that we were about to create by allowing clear cutting to go on to the extent that it has gone on. And I have not seen, given the most recent published study, that there are sufficient brakes being put upon that practice to significantly impact on the kind of communities that we've created. Aesthetically, it is probably the worst thing that the forest industry has done so far, and that is not just my own opinion, but it is the opinion of many of our guests, and it's probably the question that we answer most frequently is, why does this have to be done?
Which is why I ask it.
Yeah, and there are cogent reasons. One, in terms of the spruce budworm damage that the state suffered some years ago, there are some very good reasons for eliminating a large stand of partially and completely damaged trees. That's not very difficult to explain away. But the real reason for most of the clear cutting is just economics. We embarked upon the practice. We then used modern technology and equipment, or equipped ourselves to be able to go into the woods and clear cut, and now we're using that as the explanation for why we continue to do this. In other words, we've embarked on this, we've equipped ourselves, we've spent a lot of money on that equipment, and now we need to amortize the equipment. Well, that one knows no end, because we'll buy more equipment and the argument will continue on and on and on, despite the fact that we may think that conceptually we made a mistake way back when we embarked on it. We are going to continue and will justify our activities on a purely economic basis. That's been a mistake in many industries, and we can call up different commodities and not just pick on paper and forest products, but take the oil situation that we're in now and the dependency that we have upon it, the unwillingness that we have to wean ourselves from it to any degree. And we have another good example of embarking on a program and then allowing the program to dictate to us how we're going to conduct our lives.
Well, what is the answer? I mean, industry has great amounts of money invested in this equipment. How do they balance the books? Where are they going down the years for resource? Or should there be, have they left out the sporting industry, the sporting camp industry in their planning?
Well, yes and no. There are commercial leases on paper company land. In fact, by the very definition of that word, it is on someone else's land, and that someone else in the state of Maine is a paper company usually. So the tolerance, if you will, of the sporting community is implicit in this willingness to lease land to that activity. However, with the waning resources in our area, and especially in areas that are in any way close to mills that are established, close to the road systems that have cost a great deal of money to develop, the buffer zones that used to be understood, tacitly understood around sporting camps are being violated more and more. The camps themselves are being encroached upon by the lumbering or harvesting activities. While this is all completely within the rules and regulations of anyone's lease, and it is certainly within the rules and regulations laid down by our Land Use Regulation Commission, and I respect those rules a great deal. I think that they are respected by the paper companies as well. However, the maintenance of that environment or that community that we talked about before in such a way that the people that are coming to the Maine woods to enjoy the wildness of the Maine woods are no longer able to do so. The islands of relatively untouched timber that used to stand around the camps and around the ponds and streams are disappearing. they're not there in many areas, and they'll be gone for a long, long period of time. Multiple use, which is a buzzword in the industry, in both industries these days, has to be that certain areas of land are used exclusively for one operation and another area exclusively for another, so that within a large tract we have multiple use, but we cannot multiply use every square inch or even every acre or every 100 acres probably. And I feel that there has been insufficient feedback from the sporting camp industry, let's take the blame ourselves, to the paper companies to say that this is our crying need. We need to be able to do this in order to be able to remain viable as a business, as a recreation. To what extent the companies will be able to or be willing to respond to that with the establishment of such corridors or oases, call them what you will, is open for question. But certainly their performance in the past has shown a degree of willingness to accommodate the sporting community.
But we have about 1 minute. How much conversation develops or evolves from your guests with respect to slash besides roads?
That's probably number 2 after clear cutting, as far as their objections go, that they can't understand why there has to be such a mess. Our own landowner in our area, Champion International, has recently embarked on a very energetic campaign to clean up the roadsides and to funnel the material into the chip and biomass industry. This has already received some very positive commentary from our guests that had seen it just a year ago and are seeing it now. So I do believe it needs attention, and it's receiving it at least around us. It would be nice to see it receive it in a great wide.
It's so nice to have you here. You're a great guest. I enjoyed talking with you.
My pleasure, sir. It's good to get to know you better.
Dr. Bud Fackleman has been our guest from Little Lyford Pond Camps, one man's view in the out of doors. Thank you very much, and good night, everyone.
And as I go, I'm out to sing, my knapsack on my back.